Lonely farmer saved Apache chief's son. Next day chief came with 20 brides, choose one. It sounded like the kind of tale people told in saloons after one too many drinks, but for Ethan Cole, it became the most unforgettable twist of his life. He was no hero by nature, just a solitary farmer living miles away from the nearest town, tending to his cattle, mending fences, and nursing the silence that filled his land more faithfully than any neighbor ever had. But fate doesn't ask permission before throwing a man into the fire. That fire came one stormy night when he heard the frantic cries echoing from the canyon near his farm, a boy's voice carried by the wind, sharp with fear. Ethan, against every cautious bone in his body, grabbed his rifle and lantern and rode into the night, unaware that what he found would tie his destiny to a people whose ways were older and fiercer than anything he had ever known. The cries grew louder as he reached the ravine, and there, in the swollen waters of the creek, he spotted a figure struggling, no more than 15, the boy's arms flailing as the current threatened to drag him under. Ethan didn't think twice. He dropped from his horse, tied a rope around his chest, and plunged into the icy water. The river fought him like a beast, shoving him against rocks, dragging at his boots, but he pressed on, teeth gritted, until his hands locked around the boy's arm. With a roar that came from deep within, Ethan hauled him to the shore, collapsing in the mud as the storm lashed overhead. The boy coughed violently, spitting water, but he was alive. Alive, and staring at Ethan with wide, startled eyes that seemed to recognize something more than a savior. Ethan carried him back to the farmhouse, wrapped him in blankets, and lit the fire high to chase away the chill. The boy spoke little English, but enough for Ethan to piece together the truth. He was the son of an Apache chief, separated from his band during the storm and nearly lost to the river's fury. Ethan's mind reeled. He knew well enough what it meant to harbor someone like this. Tensions between settlers and the Apache were blood deep, and one wrong move could bring down wrath upon his land. Yet looking at the boy, shivering but alive, Ethan knew there was no choice. A life had been spared by his hands, and that meant something. By dawn, the storm had passed, but Ethan's unease only grew. He half expected to see riders cresting the horizon, demanding the boy's return, or worse, assuming Ethan had meant harm. Instead, the prairie lay silent, calm, almost too calm. The boy seemed to sense it too, his dark eyes flicking to the window every few minutes. Ethan gave him food, water, and what comfort he could, but the question gnawed at him: what next? Should he try to find the Apache camp and return the boy himself, risking his life? Or wait, knowing they would come for him sooner or later? He didn't have to wonder long. Near noon, the ground began to tremble. The faint thudding grew into a steady rhythm of hooves, and Ethan stepped out onto his porch, rifle in hand, heart pounding. Across the plain came riders, dozens of them, fierce warriors astride painted horses, their spears and rifles gleaming in the sun. At their head rode a man unlike any Ethan had ever seen, tall, proud, his face weathered by years of battle and leadership. The boy's father, the Apache chief. When the party halted at Ethan's gate, silence blanketed the air. The boy rushed out, crying in his tongue, and the chief dismounted, pulling him close with a grip both fierce and tender. Then, slowly, the chief's gaze turned to Ethan. Ethan braced himself for the worst. He expected anger, suspicion, even a spear driven into his chest. But instead, the chief raised his hand in a gesture of peace. His voice, deep and commanding, rolled across the yard. "You saved my son." Ethan blinked, uncertain if he had heard correctly, but the words were repeated in halting English by one of the younger warriors. Relief washed through him, but it was short-lived, for what came next was unlike anything he could have imagined. The chief spoke again, his words firm, his eyes never leaving Ethan's. "You are alone. Tomorrow, I will send you brides. You will choose one." The weight of those words struck Ethan harder than the river's current had. Brides, sent to him, as if the act of saving a life had rewritten his destiny entirely. The warriors mounted again, the chief giving Ethan one last piercing look before they rode off in a storm of dust. Ethan stood frozen, the boy's voice echoing in the distance as the riders disappeared. He returned to his empty house, staring at the fire crackling in the hearth, wondering if he had misunderstood, or if by morning his quiet, lonely existence would be shattered by something he could not possibly prepare for. That night he barely slept. He turned over the events again and again, searching for reason, for a way to explain what the chief had said. Was it gratitude, a debt repaid, or some ritual custom he knew nothing about? Whatever the answer, Ethan knew one thing. life as he knew it was about to end. He paced the floors of his cabin, glancing out the window every hour, imagining the horizon flooding with riders again, this time with women in tow. He almost laughed at the absurdity, but the tension in his gut was real, heavy, impossible to ignore. When dawn broke, the first thing Ethan heard was not birdsong, but the sound of approaching hooves once more. He stepped outside, the rising sun casting long shadows across his land. And there, approaching like a vision from some other world, were riders once more, but this time, they were not warriors alone. Behind them, riding proudly and tall, came 20 women, each adorned in vibrant garments, their hair braided with feathers and beads, their faces radiant with strength and beauty. Ethan's heart stopped. The chief was a man of his word. The warriors reined in, forming a circle, and the chief dismounted, his eyes burning with solemn purpose. He gestured to the women, their numbers like a living wall of color and power. Then he spoke, his voice thundering across the silent morning air, "Choose one. She will be yours, a bond for life, a gift for saving my son." Ethan felt the weight of every eye on him, 20 women staring with unreadable expressions, some curious, some proud, some almost daring him to make a choice. His mouth went dry. He had saved a life, yes, but he had never imagined the price of gratitude could be so overwhelming. Ethan's chest tightened as the weight of the moment bore down on him. 20 women stood before him, their faces proud, their postures tall and unyielding. They weren't shy maidens waiting for approval, they were the daughters of warriors, women of fire and blood, each carrying the legacy of their people in their gaze. Some looked at him with curiosity, some with skepticism, and a few with something closer to disdain, as if daring him to prove he was worthy of even considering them. Ethan's palms sweated as he swallowed hard, realizing that this was not just a choice of companionship, it was a decision that could bind him forever to the Apache, for better or worse. The chief stepped forward, his presence towering, his voice carrying the command of centuries. "You saved my son," he said slowly, carefully, so that even Ethan could understand. "Now my people save you. No man should live alone. You will choose one." Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. A voice inside screamed at him to protest, to explain that he never asked for such a gift, that his life was not built for this. But another voice, quieter yet heavier, whispered that refusing might be seen as insult, perhaps even betrayal. To save the son and then reject the father's honor, would the warriors surrounding him let such defiance stand? His eyes drifted across the line of women. The first, tall with piercing dark eyes, met his stare boldly, unflinching. She carried herself like a queen, her posture saying without words, "If you choose me, you gain more than a wife, you gain a force of nature." The second, shorter but with laughter flickering at the corners of her mouth, seemed to radiate warmth, though Ethan could tell it was the kind of warmth that hit a blade of wit sharper than steel. The third, her face painted in ceremonial streaks, watched him with a calm, assessing gaze, as if already measuring his soul against some ancient code. Each woman was different, and yet they all stood united by something greater than him, something he was only beginning to glimpse. He forced a breath, trying to steady himself. His voice cracked, dry as the desert around them. Every warrior's eye fixed on him, every woman's attention sharp as a blade. The chief remained silent, his arms folded, waiting. Ethan realized that hesitation itself might be dangerous. If he delayed too long, if he appeared ungrateful or weak, he could bring ruin upon himself. And yet how could he make such a choice? To select one woman out of 20, all strangers to him, all bound by traditions he could barely grasp. His stomach knotted, his mind raced, and for the first time in his life he wished desperately that his solitary farm had remained just that, lonely, quiet, uneventful. The boy, the chief's son, stepped forward unexpectedly, his voice breaking through the silence. He pointed toward one of the women, slight, with hair that glistened like raven's wings and eyes that burned with something Ethan couldn't name. "My sister," the boy said in halting English. Ethan's breath caught. Sister. That meant she was the chief's daughter, a woman of standing far higher than the others. The chief's gaze narrowed slightly, as if weighing whether his son's words were meant to sway the farmer or simply reveal truth. The woman herself did not move, did not blink, she only studied Ethan with an intensity that pinned him where he stood. A murmur rippled through the gathered warriors and women. Some nodded approvingly, others exchanged glances of unease. Ethan felt as though he had stepped onto the edge of a precipice, one wrong step away from disaster. Choosing the chief's daughter could mean honor, a bond directly to the leader himself. But it could also mean greater responsibility, greater danger, perhaps expectations he could never fulfill. His life had been simple, predictable, now it dangled over a chasm he could neither see the bottom of nor avoid falling into. The chief raised his hand, silencing the whispers. "Choose," he repeated, his tone sharp as flint. Ethan's throat tightened. He looked once more across the 20 faces, all watching, all waiting. Sweat rolled down his back, though the morning air was cool. He knew he could not stall much longer. And in that moment, he realized something. This was not about preference, not about beauty or charm. It was about survival. The woman he chose would determine whether he became part of their people, or remained forever an outsider tolerated only out of gratitude. His decision would echo through the rest of his life. Finally, his eyes returned to the chief's daughter, the one the boy had called sister. She stood still, her chin raised slightly, her gaze sharp yet unreadable. She was not the most openly inviting, nor the most immediately kind, but she was the one who seemed to hold the future in her very stance. Ethan's chest heaved with the weight of the choice, but when the words left his lips, they were steady. "Her," he said, his voice carrying louder than he expected, pointing to the chief's daughter. The crowd erupted in murmurs again, some surprised, some approving, others wary. The chief's daughter did not smile, did not move. She simply stepped forward, her eyes never leaving Ethan's, as if to say, "You may have chosen me, but it is I who will decide if you are worthy." The chief's face remained unreadable for a long moment, but then he gave a single nod, his deep voice cutting through the noise. "So it is done." Ethan's heart pounded as the realization settled over him. There was no turning back. His life as a lonely farmer had ended the moment he pulled that boy from the river. Now, bound by choice and by honor, he stood on the threshold of a destiny he never asked for, with a bride who looked at him not with affection or fear, but with a challenge that promised trials beyond anything he had faced before. The warriors dispersed, the women followed, and the chief lingered only a moment longer, his eyes like stone as he spoke one final phrase, "Tomorrow, the wedding begins."